The Galactic Council had existed for 10,000 years. It was a gathering of the species in the known universe. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had witnessed stars being born and dying. They had survived wars that had burned across entire galaxies, but in all their long history, they had never faced anything quite like the Unbroken. Stood 12 feet tall, his body was covered in scales that shimmered like black iron under the lights of the council chamber. His arms were as thick as tree trunks, ending in claws that could tear through starship hulls like paper. He had 4 eyes that burned with the of molten copper, and when he spoke, his voice rumbled like thunder rolling across mountains. He was the Titan of Prime, and he had conquered 17 star systems in less than a decade. The delegates of the Galactic Council sat in their elevated seats, arranged in a great circle around the central floor. There were beings of crystal and beings of light. There were creatures with tentacles and creatures with wings. Some breathed oxygen while others breathed methane or ammonia. They came from worlds of ice and worlds of fire, from gas giants and rocky moons. They represented trillions of lives across thousands of planets. And all of them were afraid. Walked into the center of the chamber with the confidence of a predator entering a den of prey. His massive feet cracked the polished stone floor with each step. Behind him came his bodyguards, warriors nearly as large as their master, their weapons humming with barely contained energy. The delegation from Prime had not come to talk, they had come to deliver terms. Ambassador of the rose from her seat. She was a beautiful being, her body made entirely of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. Her people were ancient and peaceful, devoted to art and philosophy rather than war. She had been chosen to speak for the council because her voice carried a natural calm that soothed even the most aggressive species. But her voice trembled now as she addressed the Titan. "Warlord," she began, "the Galactic Council has received your demands. You wish us to surrender all territories in the Outer Rim to your empire. You wish us to pay tribute in resources and technology. You wish us to acknowledge you as the supreme military power in this region of space." Smiled, revealing rows of teeth like serrated knives. "I do not wish these things, Ambassador, I require them. There is a difference. The Council has debated your requirements for many cycles. We have considered the matter carefully, and we have reached a decision. Speak it then, but know that my patience is not infinite." Drew herself up to her full height, which was still less than half of the Titan's massive frame. "We will not surrender, we will not pay tribute, and we will not acknowledge any power that rules through fear and violence alone." The chamber fell silent. Every delegate held their breath, waiting for the explosion of rage that would surely follow. Bodyguards tightened their grips on their weapons. The Titan himself stood perfectly still, his 4 eyes fixed on the crystal ambassador. Then he laughed. It was a terrible sound, deep and rumbling, echoing off the walls of the ancient chamber. It was the laugh of someone who had heard a joke that only they found funny. It was the laugh of absolute power confronting absolute weakness. "You refuse me," said when his laughter faded. "You who have no military to speak of, you whose worlds I could crack open like eggs, you refuse me." "We do," replied, though her crystal form was now vibrating with obvious fear. "And we are not as you believe. Enlighten me, Ambassador, what do you have? The fleet, I crushed them at Sigma Reach. Their admiral for mercy before I tore his ship apart with my bare hands. The Armada, they fled at the mere sight of my warships. There now pays me tribute in exchange for survival. Tell me what force in this galaxy can stand against the might of Prime." "We did not seek help from this galaxy." Paused, his 4 eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Our long-range sensors discovered a species on the Outer Rim, beyond the territories claimed by any known power. They call themselves humans. They come from a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system. We sent them a message explaining our situation. They have agreed to help." For the first time, a flicker of something that might have been uncertainty crossed the Titan's face. He had heard of these humans. His scouts had reported on them, dismissing them as insignificant. They were soft creatures without natural armor or weapons. They were small and fragile with short lifespans and limited physical capabilities. They had only recently developed than light travel. By every measure, they should have been beneath his notice. And yet the Council had called upon them for help. The Council, which had access to the most advanced species in the known universe, had reached out to these newcomers. There had to be a reason. "When do these humans arrive?" demanded. "They are already here," replied. The great doors of the council chamber swung open. Every head turned to see what manner of warrior humanity had sent to face the most feared being in the known universe. Bodyguards raised their weapons. The delegates leaned forward in their seats. The moment stretched out like a held breath. A human male walked through the doors. He was unremarkable by almost any standard. He stood perhaps 6 feet tall, with graying hair and a face lined by age and experience. He wore a simple uniform without decoration or ornament. His name was Cole, and he was a commander in the Earth Coalition. Behind him came a human female, slightly shorter, with brown hair pulled back in a practical style. Her name was Amy Cole, and she was a lieutenant commander as well as wife. She was carrying something in her arms, something wrapped in a small blanket. It was a child, a human female child, approximately 3 Earth years old. She had curly brown hair that fell around a round face still soft with baby fat. Her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, and she was clutching a stuffed bear that had clearly seen many years of love and use. She was wearing a pink dress decorated with small cartoon animals. Her name was Lily Cole. She had been on a starship for 18 hours. She had missed her nap. She had been given replicated food that tasted nothing like her chicken nuggets. And now she was in a strange room full of strange creatures, and there was a very large and very scary lizard man looking at her. She did not like any of this, not one bit. Stared at the tiny human. The entire council stared at the tiny human. For a long moment no one spoke, no one moved, no one breathed. Then the Titan of Prime, conqueror of 17 star systems, destroyer of worlds, the most feared being in the known galaxy, finally found his voice. "This," he said slowly, "is your warrior." Cole smiled. There was something in that smile that made several of the delegates shiver. It was the smile of someone who knew something that no one else in the room understood. "This," he replied, "is exactly what you asked for." Stepped forward, his massive form casting a shadow that swallowed the entire human family. His footsteps echoed through the silent chamber like the beating of war drums. Every delegate in the council held their breath. The bodyguards watched with cold anticipation, expecting their master to simply crush these foolish creatures and be done with it. The Titan leaned down, bringing his enormous head close to the child in Amy Cole's arms. His 4 copper eyes studied the tiny creature with a mixture of contempt and curiosity. His breath washed over her, hot and smelling of smoke and something metallic. He wanted to see fear. He wanted to see the terror that his presence always inspired in lesser beings. Lily looked up at the giant monster face now inches from her own. She saw the massive teeth, the burning eyes, the scales like armor plates. Her tired brain tried to process what she was seeing. This was not her bedroom. This was not her playroom. This was not anywhere she recognized, and this thing in front of her was definitely not one of her stuffed animals. Her lower lip began to tremble. Cole took a step back. Amy tightened her grip on her daughter but made no move to shield her. The experienced parents knew what was coming. They had seen the signs 1,000 times before, the trembling lip, the widening eyes, the deep breath that preceded the storm. "What is this?" demanded. "Why does it make that face?" He never got an answer. Lily Cole, 3 years old, exhausted beyond measure, overwhelmed by everything around her, did what any human toddler would do when confronted with a terrifying situation they did not understand and could not control. She screamed. The sound that came from her tiny lungs was unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever encountered. It was not simply loud, though it was certainly that. It was not simply high-pitched, though it made several crystalline delegates vibrate dangerously. It was something far more primal, far more powerful, far more devastating than mere noise. It was the pure, concentrated fury of a human child who had reached the absolute limit of her patience. Stumbled backward, his massive hands flying to the sides of his head. His species had evolved on a world of constant danger, where every creature was a predator and survival meant being the most dangerous predator of all. They had developed resistance to sonic attacks, to psychic assaults, to every form of warfare that the universe had thrown at them, but nothing in their evolutionary history had prepared them for this. The scream continued. It did not seem possible that such a small creature could produce such a sustained sound. Lily's face had turned a remarkable shade of red. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. Her entire body was rigid with the effort of expressing her displeasure to the universe at large. "Make it stop," roared, but his voice was barely audible over the continuing wail. The council chamber had descended into chaos. Delegates were covering their ears, their audio receptors, their sensory membranes. Some were fleeing toward the exits. Others had simply frozen in place, unable to process what they were witnessing. One of the representatives had actually fainted. Cole stood calmly in the midst of the storm. His wife was equally unperturbed. They had developed immunity to this particular weapon over 3 years of constant exposure. Their hearing had adapted. Their nerves had hardened. They could weather tantrums that would break lesser beings. "What is happening?" cried out, her crystal form resonating dangerously with the frequencies of the scream. "It is called a tantrum," explained, raising his voice to be heard. "It is a natural mechanism of human young. When they are tired, hungry, or overwhelmed, they enter this state. It can last anywhere from minutes to hours." "Hours?" one of the bodyguards gasped. "Our record is 4 hours and 17 minutes. That was when she was 2." Lily had now progressed to the next phase of the tantrum. She was squirming in her mother's arms, kicking her legs and flailing her small fists. Amy set her down on the floor, knowing from experience that trying to restrain a tantruming toddler only made things worse. The moment Lily's feet touched the ground, she threw herself flat on her back and began pounding the floor with her heels. "I want to go home," she screamed. "I want my bed, I want nuggets, real nuggets, not space nuggets." Had retreated to the far side of the chamber. The mighty Titan, who had faced armies without flinching, was now pressing himself against the wall like a cornered animal. His bodyguards had formed a defensive circle around him, their weapons raised, as if they could somehow shoot the noise into submission. "Is this an attack?" one of them shouted. "Is she a weapon?" In a manner of speaking, Amy replied. She had folded her arms and was watching her daughter with the patient resignation of a veteran parent. Human children are born completely helpless. They cannot walk, cannot feed themselves, cannot do anything to ensure their own survival. So they evolved the ability to demand attention with such intensity that no creature, no matter how powerful, can ignore them. Lily had spotted her stuffed bear lying on the floor a few feet away. It had fallen from her grasp during the initial eruption. She crawled toward it, still sobbing, still hiccuping with rage. When she reached it, she clutched it to her chest and directed her tear-stained glare at. "You're mean," she declared at maximum volume. "You're a mean, scary monster and I don't like you. You made me drop my bear and now he's sad." The Titan of Prime, destroyer of worlds, conqueror of empires, had been called many things in his long life. He had been called Death Incarnate. He had been called the End of Hope. He had been called Nightmare made flesh. But never, in all his centuries of existence, had anyone called him a mean, scary monster who made a bear sad. He had no idea how to respond. Lily sensed his confusion. She did not understand it, but some instinct told her that the giant monster was no longer as scary as he had seemed. She pushed herself to her feet, still clutching her bear, still hiccuping, still radiating toddler fury. Then she took off one of her small pink shoes and threw it at with all the strength her tiny arm could muster. It bounced off his armored leg and fell to the floor. The Titan flinched. Every being in the chamber saw it. The mighty, who had never shown fear in the face of any enemy, had flinched at a shoe thrown by a 3-year-old girl. The moment would be remembered for generations. It would be studied by military historians and child psychologists alike. It would become legend. Lily was not finished. She marched toward the cowering giant, her small feet slapping against the cracked floor, her face set in an expression of absolute determination. She stopped directly in front of him, craned her neck back to look up at his towering form, and delivered her final. "You need a time out," she announced. "You were being bad and now you have to sit and think about what you did." Then she sat down on the floor, crossed her arms and stared at him expectantly. The tantrum was over, the storm had passed, but its effects would echo across the galaxy forever. The silence that followed the tantrum was than any that had ever filled the council chamber. No one moved, no one spoke. Every eye, every sensor, every form of perception was fixed on the impossible scene playing out on the chamber floor. Lily Cole sat with her arms crossed, her stuffed bear clutched against her chest, up at the 12-foot Titan with the unblinking expectation that only a toddler could muster. She had demanded that he take a time out. She was waiting for him to comply. Remained pressed against the wall. His 4 eyes darted around the chamber, taking in the stunned faces of the council delegates, the confused expressions of his own bodyguards, the calm patience of the 2 adult humans. For the first time in his long life, he felt something he did not recognize. It was not fear exactly. He had faced death many times and never feared it. This was something else, something more unsettling. He felt embarrassed. "I do not take time outs," he finally managed to say. His voice had lost its thunderous quality. He sounded almost uncertain. "Bad guys have to take time outs," Lily replied firmly. "Mommy says." Amy Cole walked over to her daughter and sat down beside her on the floor. She did not pick Lily up or try to quiet her. She simply sat there, as if having a seat on the floor of the most important diplomatic chamber in the galaxy was the most natural thing in the world. "She makes a good point," Amy said. "You have been very bad. You scared a lot of people. You hurt a lot of people. Time outs are for thinking about how to be better." Looked at Cole, searching for some explanation, some hint that this was all an elaborate trick or trap, but the human commander simply shrugged his shoulders, as if to say that this was entirely out of his hands now. "Your species," said slowly, "is very strange." "You have no idea," replied. The ambassador rose from her seat and carefully made her way down to the chamber floor. Her crystalline form still vibrated slightly from the residual effects of the tantrum, but curiosity had overcome her fear. She approached the small human child with the caution of someone handling an unexploded bomb. Little one, said, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, do you understand who this being is? He is the Unbroken. He has destroyed entire worlds. He has killed billions of creatures across 17 star systems. He is the most dangerous being in the known galaxy. Lily considered this information. Her face scrunched up in the way that meant she was thinking very hard about something. Then she looked back at with renewed scrutiny. Did you say sorry? She asked him. What? When you were bad, did you say sorry? Opened his mouth to deliver some cutting response, some reminder of his power and authority, but the words died in his throat. He looked at the small creature before him, this being who had no fear of him despite knowing what he had done. She was not asking because she was trying to trick him or manipulate him. She was asking because she genuinely wanted to know. No, he admitted, I did not say sorry. Lily gravely, that's why you're still in trouble. You have to say sorry when you're bad, otherwise nobody can forgive you. I do not need forgiveness. I am the Titan of Prime. I take what I want. I destroy what I please. I answer to no one. That sounds lonely. The words hit like a physical blow. He stood there, towering over the tiny human, surrounded by his warriors and the delegates who feared him, and for the first time he saw himself through different eyes. He saw a creature who had spent centuries pushing everyone away. He saw a being who had chosen power over connection, conquest over friendship, fear over love. He saw exactly what this child saw, someone who was very, very lonely. Slowly, like a mountain deciding to sit down, lowered himself to the floor. His massive form folded until he was sitting cross-legged, his head now only slightly above the level of the standing delegates. His bodyguards made sounds of alarm, but he silenced them with a gesture. You are correct, he said to Lily. It is lonely. Why did you do all those bad things? Was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than anyone had ever heard it. My world is harsh. My people evolved to fight and kill and conquer. We had no choice. If we did not take from others, we would die. When we finally reached the stars, we did what we had always done. We took, we conquered, we destroyed. It was all we knew. But you're not on your world anymore. You're out here with all these other people. You could do different stuff now. It is not that simple. Why not? Had no answer. He looked at Cole again, searching for help explaining the complexities of galactic politics and species instinct and generations of warfare. But the human just smiled and sat down on the floor beside his wife and daughter. You know, said, she asks us that question about 100 times a day. Why not? Why can't I have ice cream for breakfast? Why do I have to go to bed? Why can't the dog sleep in my bed? And most of the time, when we really think about it, the answer is just because that's how we've always done it. Your daughter is suggesting I should change hundreds of years of culture because she says so. Pretty much, yeah. Lily had grown bored with the adult conversation. She stood up and walked over to, stopping directly in front of his massive seated form. She held out her stuffed bear, offering it to him with the solemnity of a priest offering a sacred relic. His name is Buttons, she said. He's my best friend. You can hold him if you're sad. He makes everything better. Looked at the small, worn stuffed animal being offered to him. It was missing one button eye. Its fur was matted from countless hugs. It smelled faintly of juice and baby shampoo. It was, objectively, a worthless object by any measure that the Titan understood. And yet this child was offering to share it with him. This tiny creature, who had nothing in the galaxy except her parents and her bear, was giving him her most precious possession because she thought he was sad. He reached out with one massive clawed hand and carefully, gently took the bear from her. It looked absurd in his grip, like a pebble in the hand of a giant, but he held it as carefully as he would hold the most fragile treasure. Thank you, he said. The words felt strange in his mouth. He was not sure he had ever said them before. Lily, apparently satisfied. Now you have to be nice. That's the rule when you hold buttons. That is the rule. Yeah, Mommy made it. Looked at Amy Cole, who shrugged. House rules, sorry, they apply universally. The Titan of Prime, conqueror of 17 star systems, holder of buttons, the stuffed bear, made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was rusty and uncertain, like machinery that had not been used in a very long time, but it was, unmistakably, a laugh. I believe, he said, we have much to discuss. The council chamber had transformed into something no one could have predicted. The mighty delegates who had sat in elevated for 10,000 years had descended from their seats and gathered on the floor in a great circle. The Titan of Prime sat among them, still holding a small stuffed bear named Buttons. His bodyguards had lowered their weapons and now stood in confused silence along the walls, unsure what their role was in this strange new situation. Lily Cole wandered through the gathering like a tiny ambassador, inspecting each alien species with open curiosity. She poked the crystalline surface of his arm and giggled when it made a musical sound. She tried to count the tentacles of the delegate and lost track somewhere around 7. She asked the representative why his skin was purple and accepted his explanation about blood chemistry with a solemn nod that suggested she understood perfectly. And Amy Cole sat near, watching their daughter with the practiced vigilance of parents who knew that toddlers could create interstellar incidents at any moment. But they also watched with a kind of wonder. They had been soldiers once, trained to fight and kill. They had been diplomats trained to negotiate and compromise. They had never been trained for this, for using their 3-year-old daughter as a weapon of peace. "I still do not understand," said quietly to, "how did you know this would work?" "We didn't, we hoped, we guessed. We understood something about you that you maybe didn't understand about yourself." "And what is that?" "You're not actually evil. You're just doing what you were taught to do. You're conquering because that's what your people have always done. But when you looked at Lily when she screamed at you and threw her shoe at you and demanded that you take a time out, you didn't kill her. You could have. You could have destroyed all of us with a wave of your hand, but you didn't." Was silent for a long moment. He looked down at the stuffed bear in his massive grip, at its missing eye and worn fur. "She was not afraid of me." No, she wasn't. Children don't understand fear the way adults do. They don't know they're supposed to be scared of the most powerful being in the galaxy. All she knew was that you were being loud and scary and she didn't like it, so she told you. No one has ever told me anything. Not in centuries. They plead, they beg, they surrender. They never just tell me. Amy leaned forward. "That's because everyone around you has learned to fear you. They've learned that speaking honestly to you means death, so they stopped being honest. They told you what you wanted to hear. They agreed with everything you said, and you ended up surrounded by people who were too scared to tell you the truth." "The truth, That what you were doing was wrong, that conquering and destroying wasn't making you happy, that all your power and all your victories were leaving you emptier and emptier. No one dared say it, so you kept doing the same things, expecting different results and wondering why nothing ever felt like enough." Lily returned to the group, having completed her inspection of the assembled delegates. She climbed into her mother's lap and leaned back against her chest, watching with thoughtful eyes. "Are you still sad?" she asked him. "I am thinking," replied. "I am thinking about many things. Thinking is hard. It makes my head feel fuzzy." "Yes, it does." Moved closer to the small gathering, the ambassador had been watching the exchange with growing wonder. She had spent her entire career studying the art of diplomacy, learning the subtle techniques of negotiation and persuasion. She had never seen anything like what was happening here. "Warlord," she said carefully, "the council would like to propose a new arrangement, not surrender but partnership. We could help your people. We have resources, technology, knowledge that could transform Prime. Your people would no longer need to conquer to survive. They could trade, could cooperate, could become part of a community instead of its terror." Listened without responding. His bodyguards shifted uneasily. This was not how negotiations were supposed to work. Their master was supposed to make demands, not listen to offers. He was supposed to threaten, not consider. "And what would you want in return?" finally asked. "Peace, simply peace, an end to the conquering, an end to the destruction, a chance for all our peoples to grow and thrive without fear. You ask me to change everything my species has ever known. We ask you to try something different, that is all. Try and see what happens." Lily on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, I'm hungry." Amy smiled. "I know, baby, we'll get food soon. I want nuggets, real ones. We'll find some, I promise." Watch this simple exchange with strange intensity. A mother promising to feed her child, such a small thing, such an ordinary thing, and yet it contained everything he had been missing in his long, violent life. Connection, care, the simple love between parent and child. "I had a mother once," he said quietly. "She was a warrior as all are warriors. She died in battle when I was young. I barely remember her." "I'm sorry," Amy said. "That must have been very hard." "I never thought about it that way. I thought it was normal. I thought loss and violence were simply what life was. I never considered that there might be another way." Reached out and put a hand on the Titan's massive arm. It was a gesture that would have gotten any other being killed instantly, but did not move, did not flinch, did not pull away. "There is another way," said. "It's harder in some respects. It requires you to be vulnerable, to trust people, to admit when you're wrong. But it's also richer, fuller, more meaningful than anything you can take by force." "How do you know this?" "Because I used to be a soldier. I used to think that strength was the only thing that mattered. Then I met Amy and we had children, and I learned that real strength is being able to put your weapons down. Real power is choosing peace when you could choose war." Lily had fallen asleep in her mother's arms. exhausted from her earlier tantrum and the strange adventure she found herself in. Her small chest rose and fell with gentle breaths. Her hand still rested on her stuffed bear, even though still held most of it in his grip. The Titan looked at the sleeping child, at this tiny creature who had done something no army in the galaxy could do. She had made him question himself. She had made him want to be better. "I will try," he said finally. "I do not know if I will succeed. I do not know if my people will accept this change, but I will try." His crystalline form brightened with what might have been joy. "That is all we ask. That is all anyone can ever ask. But I have one condition." The chamber tensed, delegates exchanged worried glances, bodyguards tightened their grips on weapons, the hopeful moment threatened to shatter. "What condition?" asked carefully. Looked down at the stuffed bear in his hand. "I would like to know where I can obtain one of these, one of my own. If holding it makes you nice, perhaps all should have one." Cole laughed, a genuine sound of surprised delight. "I think we can arrange that. Earth has quite a lot of stuffed animals to spare." "Then we have an agreement." And just like that, in the most unlikely way possible, peace came to the galaxy. The story of what happened in the council chamber spread across the galaxy than any news had ever traveled. Ships carried the tale to distant star systems, traders whispered it in spaceport bars, diplomats discussed it in hushed tones at formal gatherings. Within weeks, every sentient being in the known universe had heard some version of the incredible events. The versions varied wildly. Some said the human child possessed psychic powers that could shatter minds. Others claimed she wielded a sonic weapon of devastating power. A few insisted she was not a child at all, but a carefully engineered weapon designed specifically to defeat the Titan. The truth, as always, was stranger and simpler than any. A 3-year-old girl had thrown a tantrum because she was tired and wanted chicken nuggets, and in doing so, she had changed the course of galactic history. The Cole family returned to Earth as heroes, though Lily found the whole thing confusing. She did not understand why so many people wanted to take her picture. She did not understand why the president of Earth called her a symbol of hope for all humanity. She did not understand why her preschool teachers looked at her differently now. All she knew was that she finally got her chicken nuggets, real ones with ketchup, and that was really what mattered. The peace treaty between the Galactic Council and the Empire was signed 3 months after the incident. It was the most comprehensive agreement in the history of interstellar relations. They would withdraw from the territories they had conquered. The Council would provide resources and technology to help develop Prime. Trade routes would open between former enemies. Cultural exchanges would begin. And at the center of it all, mentioned in the official documents and remembered in the unofficial songs, was the human child who had refused to be afraid. Returned to his changed being. His people did not understand at first. They had expected him to return in triumph with new conquests to celebrate and new slaves to display. Instead, he came back with strange ideas about cooperation and peace. He spoke of a tiny creature who had shown him a different way. He carried, of all things, a small stuffed bear that he had refused to give back. The transition was not easy. Many rejected the new teachings. They had been warriors for too long to simply put down their weapons. There were conflicts, disagreements, even a few attempted rebellions. But slowly, gradually, things began to change. The first trade ships arrived from Earth carrying medical supplies, agricultural technology, and education. They also carried, at specific request, approximately 10 million stuffed animals of various types. These were distributed to children who had never owned anything so soft and harmless. The effect was profound. A generation grew up hugging stuffed bears and rabbits and elephants, learning that not everything in the universe had to be a weapon. Lily Cole grew up largely unaware of her legendary status. Her parents worked hard to give her a normal childhood. She went to school, made friends, learned to ride a bicycle. She scraped her knees and fought with her siblings and had her heart broken for the first time at age 14. She was, in every meaningful way, an ordinary human girl. But every year on her birthday, a package would arrive from the other side of the galaxy. It was always the same, a small figurine carved from volcanic glass, depicting a tiny human child facing a giant monster. The inscription translated from "Read" to "The Fierce One with Gratitude." Lily kept all of them on a shelf in her room, next to Buttons, the stuffed bear who had seen better days but refused to fall apart. When she was 18, Lily applied to the newly established Galactic Diplomatic Corps that had been created specifically to train humans in interstellar relations based on the demonstrated effectiveness of Earth's unique approach to conflict resolution. Her application essay was 3 sentences long. "I am Lily Cole. I made the scary lizard man take a time out. I believe I am qualified." She was accepted immediately. The Galactic Council built a memorial on Nexus Station, in the exact spot where the famous confrontation had taken place. It was a simple monument, a bronze statue of a small human child facing an enormous shadow. The plaque beneath it read, "Here a child reminded us that power without compassion is weakness, and that the bravest hearts come in the smallest packages." Visited the memorial once, near the end of his long life. He stood before the statue of the child who had changed everything, and he remembered the feeling of holding a stuffed bear named Buttons while a tiny voice told him he needed a time out. He remembered the shame and the confusion, and then slowly the understanding. "Thank you," he said to the empty air, "for seeing something worth saving." Far across the galaxy, Lily Cole was negotiating a trade agreement between two species who had been at war for centuries. She was patient and kind and absolutely unafraid. When the negotiations grew tense, when voices raised and threats were made, she simply looked at the angry delegates and asked them one simple question. "Why can't you just be friends?" It was not sophisticated, it was not clever, it was the kind of question a child would ask. And every single time, it worked. The species that had once feared the Titan of Prime eventually forgot to be afraid. They learned instead to be curious about these strange, soft creatures from a small blue planet. They learned that humans were not mighty or powerful by galactic standards. They were fragile and short-lived and prone to emotional outbursts that made no logical sense. But they were also brave beyond reason. They loved fiercely and completely. They protected their young with a ferocity that rivaled any warrior, and they had mastered something that no other species had ever understood. They had learned to turn weakness into strength. The galaxy was vast and old and full of wonders. It had seen empires rise and fall. It had witnessed wars that burned across star systems. It had endured horrors that imagination. But it had never seen anything quite like humanity. And it had certainly never seen anything like the 3-year-old girl who had defeated a galactic conqueror with nothing but tears and fury, and an absolute refusal to accept that the world should be scary. In the end, the lesson was simple. You did not need weapons to change the universe. You did not need armies or fleets or terrible powers of destruction. All you needed was the courage to tell a monster that it was being mean. And then demand chicken nuggets. Lily Cole lived a long and remarkable life. She helped negotiate 17 major peace treaties. She established diplomatic relations with dozens of new species. She trained hundreds of human diplomats who went on to change the galaxy in their own ways. But when people asked her what her greatest accomplishment was, she always gave the same answer. "I made a friend," she would say. "He was big and scary and everyone was afraid of him, but I could tell he was really just sad and lonely, so I shared my bear with him." It was, she maintained, as simple as that. And maybe it really was.